Alright, what's going on everyone? Welcome to my Arms Warrior PvP guide for patch 9.1. A lot of you have been asking me to make an updated Arms Warrior guide for Shadowlands Season 2 as a lot has changed in terms of covenants, Soulbinds, Legendaries, Conduits, and all that good stuff. Now, unlike my other guides, I'm going to spend more time in this video breaking down what you really need to know when it comes to excelling in arena as an arms warrior, your rotation, how you use your abilities, all of that good stuff, which will be towards the end of the video. If there's anything I don't cover in this video, you can check out my live stream somewhere here on the screen. I stream Monday, Wednesday, Friday at 12 p.m. PST. You can also check out my boy Magnus, which will be somewhere here on the screen as well. Go ahead and let him know I sent you. I'm sure he'd appreciate it. And he also has a written guide that I will list in the description box below if you want something to refer to if you don't want to watch the entire video, which I understand. People don't like spending a lot of time watching videos. I get all that good stuff. Now, fortunately, we do have a sponsor for this video on a product that I actually use, so we'll hop into that, and I'll see you guys back here at the guide. Thank you, NordVPN, for sponsoring this video. NordVPN is a virtual private network designed as an easy-to-use app that lets you access content anywhere as if you were in another country. And I know what many of you are thinking. Why does this matter? Well, let me explain. Oftentimes I have viewers that say some of my content or videos are blocked in another country, or they cannot access certain websites because of nationwide restrictions. NordVPN allows you to bypass all of that. An example would be the Netflix library. Because I'm located in the US, I was able to watch the Last Dance Michael Jordan documentary on Netflix before almost everyone else without cable, as other countries had it before we did. In fact, depending on where you're at in the world, you may be missing out on a large portion of the Netflix library because of certain restrictions. You can get more out of your applications with NordVPN. And more importantly, you can ensure your internet security using a virtual private network. In the past, I've had viewers send gifts to my address without me even knowing. And while I appreciate the gifts, it was a little scary because I never gave out my address. Since then, having a VPN is a must for me in my work, especially during times like these. So if you're looking to keep your internet connection secure with up to 6 connected devices, NordVPN might be the perfect fit for you. Right now with my link using code Stoopzz, you can get 73% off the 2-year plan plus 4 months absolutely free. That's right, free. And oh, there's also a 30-day money-back guarantee, so you really have nothing to lose. So if this sounds interesting to you, check out the link in the description, and thank you NordVPN for sponsoring this video. Now, like all of my guides in the past, I'll be covering our general towns. I'll then go into our PvP towns. I'll go into our covenants, our soulbind trees, our legendaries, and then I'll spend the remaining portion of the video giving you guys the bread and butter and how to actually perform well on this class. There's timestamps listed below. Check them out. Okay, so as mentioned earlier, I'm not going to spend too much time on this. Level 15, you always take sudden death. Level 25, you nearly always take Stormbolt. You need a stun to perform well in PvP. Level 30, Massacre. Level 35, Defensive Stance. Level 40, Warbreaker. Level 45, Avatar. And the only one that you'll really ever change out of is level 50, and that's going to be Dreadnought and Anger Management. Dreadnought is your go-to, especially if you're playing the Kyrian and Necrolord legendary Battle Lord. When you take that, you really need those 2 charges of overpower. We'll cover that when we get to that portion of the legendary section of the video. But for level 50, sometimes you'll take Anger Management against rogues and warriors in 2v2 arena. And the reason why you might take this is because a lot of rogues now having this disarm ability in Season 2 of Shadowlands, they will disarm every single one of your Warbreakers if they're any good. If they're not any good, or you're doing a mirror matchup versus another warrior in 2v2 arena, not 3v3, 2v2, if they are just disarming at random parts of the game where they just disarm you just for fun and not actually on your burst when you press your Warbreaker, if they're doing that, then you won't get that much use out of this talent. But as you get higher rated and you fight better players in 2v2, they will always disarm your Warbreaker. So getting your Warbreaker up more often and making it so it doesn't align with the disarm cooldown. All of them are 45 seconds on Mistweaver Monks, on Assassination Rogues or Sub Rogues, and Warriors. Having it not align allows you to get your burst up without getting disarmed every single time, and that can be extremely frustrating. But almost every other time or every other game or any other matchup, especially in 3v3, you'll be taking Dreadnought. Okay, so that was a quick rundown. Now hopping into our PvP talents. The first one that I'm going to cover is Sharpened Blade. I covered this in the last guide. Sharpened Blade is something that you'll take like every game. There's almost never a time I don't take Sharpened Blade unless I'm fighting Rogue Mage in 2v2 or in 3v3 like Rogue Mage Priest, for example. In 2v2, there's not that much use in this talent when you're fighting classes that don't provide any type of self-healing or off-healing. Even in double DPS examples, like if I'm fighting a Shadow Priest or I'm fighting like an Ellie Shaman or a Boomy in double DPS 2v2, so like Boomy Fire Mage, I still might take Sharpened Blade because those classes still heal a lot with like Frenzy Regen, and I like to sharpen them as they're getting low so they don't recover as easily, and you can kind of go in for the win. So that's when I'll take that. In 3v3, I opt to not take it sometimes if I'm fighting Rogue Mage Priest, for example, where I know that I'm playing a comp that has a tremendous amount of burst. Like if I'm playing Ret Warrior Druid or Ret Warrior Shaman in threes, we have so much burst that Sharpen doesn't provide a lot of value because they just kind of get one shot by the Ret. However, you can almost always lock this in. I'd recommend that if you're new to the game, your burst isn't going to be aligned well. Your teammates might make a mistake. You might not be getting CC when you need it when you're going to set up for your burst. So just take Sharpened Blade every game. As you get more experience, you can experiment not playing with it. And in 2v2 Arena, I don't take this versus Rogue Mage because they don't have a lot of healing for the most part. So I'll skip out on that. But since this talent is an auto lock-in, you're then kind of left with two other options. Okay? If you're playing Venthyr, you always take Death Sentence unless for some reason you don't need the mobility, but there's very few cases where that actually applies. Like if you're fighting a Shadow Priest Warrior, for example, you might not need it in 3v3. Shadow Priest Warrior like Resto Shaman as an example. The Shadow Priest isn't very mobile. They don't have a freedom to allow the Shadow Priest to move away from you during your hamstring moments. But I would still say if you're taking Venthyr, you get so much value out of this talent. It allows you to swap to other targets when they're above 80% health, and getting that charge to allow you to connect to them is really helpful. Now, if you're not playing Venthyr, and we'll get to that portion in the Covenant section of the video, then you don't have to take Death Sentence. In fact, I wouldn't recommend taking it, and it frees up a lot of your talent options, right? Now you have two talent options to work with, and that's one of the benefits of not playing Venthyr. You're not as locked into two talents, right? So if you are a Venthyr warrior, you're essentially stuck with one free talent option. And in these options, you have Disarm, which will be great versus melee cleaves. Like if you're fighting another warrior and like a Ret, like if you're fighting Ret Warrior Arsham, or you're fighting like DH Warrior. If you're fighting a Frost DK Windwalker, Disarm is amazing because you can line it up with a lot of their major offensive CDs. You want to use Disarm to disarm the enemy on their major CDs. So you need to start thinking about what cooldowns they have, like Pillars of Frost is a great thing to disarm. If you're fighting another warrior, you should only be disarming their Warbreaker, right? They line up perfectly. They're both 45-second cooldowns. You don't want to disarm just random stuff. You want to disarm their massive cooldowns because that's when they deal the most amount of damage. So that's when you're going to get the best amount, the best level of value, I should say. Now, versus rogues, I will often take this in twos because I like to delay their kidney shot. So a lot of rogues want to kidney on CD, whether they're playing sub or assass. Basically, they rely on their kidney shot to set up. If you're fighting an assassination rogue, that's when they're going to be dealing the most damage. That's when they're going to have the most amount of control. And if you're fighting sub, the way that subtlety rogues work is they typically will kidney shot the healer or the off target, and then they'll cheap shot spam their kill target. And in those cases, I like to disarm them right before their kidney shot is about to come back up to delay the go, right? I want to make it so they don't get their kidney go as often as possible. If I can disarm them before every other kidney, then that's going to give me maybe 10 seconds or 12 seconds of no kidney shot, and that's going to make a big difference, over the span of a minute, right? You're essentially delaying their go. This is great also in threes if you're not a Venthyr warrior where you don't have to take banner, and we'll get to that in a second. If you're like a Kyrian warrior, for example, and you're playing something like this is also great because you can disarm the rogue right as they're about to go. Let's say your healer gets sheeped and you see the rogue running at you or somebody else. You can try to disarm him so that way they don't get the kidney shot, and that kind of throws off their go. So the way you use disarm is to, number one, either disarm them on their burst, or number two, to delay their go via disarming them right as kidney shot is about to come back up. Okay, so disarm has a lot of value there. Now, if I'm a Venthyr warrior and I'm stuck in these, it's disarm or war banner. War banner is an insane talent. This talent is one of your best talents. It's a 1.5 minute CD, so you don't want to just throw it out for absolutely no reason. This is probably one of the more difficult abilities to use as a warrior because you can just kind of throw it out there and it provides no value. You get no value out of it. They just kill it and you essentially just wasted a 1.5 minute CD. So as a new player, I understand that this can be a bit intimidating or tricky to use. The way you want to start off using it as a new player is essentially if you see a CC anywhere on your screen. So if I'm chasing after a mage and a mage is right in front of me and I see him casting a sheep on my screen, it doesn't matter who he's casting it on. It doesn't matter if it's on me, on my healer. Right now, if you're a new player, your awareness isn't going to be the greatest. You're not going to know who he's trying to sheep. So all you want to do is get in the habit of using this talent. So if I see somebody on my screen, a boomkin casting a cyclone, a mage casting a sheep, a warlock casting a fear, I'm just going to drop banner as the cast is about to finish. That way I put somebody on DR, they used it, and now it's kind of thrown off their CC chain a bit. As you improve and you get better using the ability, just remembering you have it, once your awareness improves, you'll then be able to see the mage that's maybe like 10 yards behind you trying to CC your healer, and you can drop the banner as the cast is about to finish to save your healer from getting put in a long CC chain. So with War Banner, just start playing with it, start using it. I take this versus any setup comp. So if I'm fighting a hunter that likes to use traps to get pressure, I use it. If I see him moving towards my healer, I drop the banner. If I'm fighting a mage, if I'm fighting a warlock, if I'm fighting anything that has some type of reliable or spammable CC, I love to take it. If I'm fighting rogue mage in twos, my talents will often look something like this. If I'm not playing Venthyr and I don't need to take that sentence, maybe I take Big Rally. Okay, so we're kind of working our way down through these talents. Master and Commander is a solid option if you have nothing else really to take. I do like playing this, again, especially if I'm not a Venthyr warrior, into Rogue Mage, into any caster comp. It's all about what you have the space for, right? So you have to consider, do I need Sharpen? Yes. Do I need a Disarm? Yes. Am I Venthyr? Yes. Am I not Venthyr? Well, what else can I take? The other talents that you can explore around with is Warbringer. This is something that is your like offensive pressure. I take this a lot in twos versus Demon Hunters, versus Windwalkers, sometimes versus R-Druids. I take this essentially if I want ways to connect a bit easier. It puts them in a route for 2 seconds. It actually does pretty decent damage when you do charge the target. The only thing that you have to keep in mind is it can break CC, and it's not something that you'll have space for in threes a lot, right? Like you may have better value taking a Disarm. You may have better value when you're fighting an R-Druid playing something like Banner. So it's just if you have the free space, depending on your Covenant. And it's something that you're only going to take if you're really comfortable in your class, you're comfortable with your healer, and maybe you want it to even peel for your healer, right? You can root the Windwalker off your healer, giving them some time to breathe, to get some space, to get some casts off, okay? Those are generally going to be the PvP talents that you take. I never really play with Storm of Destruction anymore, and I never really play with Demolition, Duel, things like that. All right, now moving into the Covenant portion of the video. All of the options are good in their own way. If you're a new player and you strictly do PvP, I highly recommend Venthyr. Venthyr is much more forgiving in terms of its mobility due to Death Sentence. A lot of new warriors typically overuse their charge, they overuse their heroic leap, and they get stuck a lot, and having that charge execute is very nice in terms of getting around on the map and also connecting to your target. With that being said, I still think Venthyr is great because it's very good in LFG games, and I know a lot of people are in LFG and they don't have a designated team, so it's much more flexible. Kyrian also recently got a buff in terms of execute getting buffed by 10% and overpower getting buffed by 10%. And this is great if you're playing Battlelord. We'll get to that in the legendary portion of the video. And it's also pretty flexible. However, it's harder to use because you have to actually land your spear and you're going to have less mobility. So you have to learn how to create better uptime. So Kyrian's also great, just a little bit more difficult to play in my opinion. Necrolord is only really good if you have classes that work well with your Necrolord buff. You get 400 mastery for your team. That can be great with Ret Paladins if you're playing Ret Warrior Archon as an example, or if you're playing with a Feral Druid that benefits from mastery, or if you're playing with an Enhancement Shaman. But that's only going to be for people that I would say have a designated team. If you're a Night Fae Warrior, because you love Mythic Plus or you love raiding, it's still good. It's just not as useful in a lot of situations like some of the other covenants are. As far as conduits go, I'll have a Soulbind tree for the main 3 covenants that people typically play. If you're playing Night Fae, you just want to make sure that you're including Crash the Ramparts, Safeguard, Stalwart Guardian, and Mortal Combo. The rest of them you can kind of flex around in terms of what you think is going to be beneficial for your team, but those are the main Soulbind trees that you'll want to go, and I'll have them somewhere here on the screen. Okay, now hopping into your desired legendaries, every warrior, no matter what covenant you are, will always want Misshapen Mirror. You want to have this at least at some rank because it's so useful versus any mage team that wants to CC your allies as you're pushing in. You want to have it versus druids that have Cyclone, versus hunters with traps. It's so good in 2v2 and 3v3 arena that I highly recommend you at least have one of them. If you're playing Necrolord, Kyrian, or you're playing Night Fae, you'll want to have at least a Battle Lord at some rank. This is going to be your main offensive legendary. And if you're Venthyr, you'll want to have an Exploiter. If you are a Kyrian warrior and you have the Soul Ash, I highly recommend you get the level 48 legendary, renowned legendary. It's known as Elysian Might. This legendary is very, very strong. However, you have to time it well, because if you use it at the wrong time where hunters can feign death out of it or shadow priests can fade out of it, you essentially wasted this legendary because it's essentially just void, because they're just going to walk out of your spear and it does nothing. So you have to time this well, and to get the most value out of this, you also want to have a set of crit verse gear. I know in the previous section I showed you some stats on the screen of which stats you should have based on your covenant. I know not everyone at the start of the season is going to have a wide array of gear where they can choose different stats, but as the season goes on, you might have a set of crit verse gear and a set of haste verse gear depending on the covenant that you're playing. If you're playing Elysian Might, to get the most out of it, you want to have verse crit gear, but outside of that, as a Kyrian warrior, you want verse haste gear, and then all the other covenants except Venthyr also want a set of verse haste gear. And then again, for Exploiter, if you're Venthyr, you want verse crit gear. Hopefully that makes sense, and hopefully that's understandable. All right, now getting into the portion of the video that probably matters the most, and that's going to be how to play your class successfully in Shadowlands Arena Season 2. What abilities you use, how do you use them? First of all, you're going to need some decent macros, not a ton of them. I'll have a paste bin down below on what macros you can look to use, but the most important macros for you to have are going to be your Stormbolt macros for either focus target or Arena 1, 2, 3, enemy Arena 1, 2, 3, or your intervene macros for your allies, your party members, and that's going to be party intervene 1, party intervene 2. Okay? Now, as far as your rotation goes and how you're going to successfully use that rotation, the most important ability for you to have up at all times is going to be Hamstring. I play with people all the time in my stream, random people in LFG if I'm bored at night and I have none of my friends on to play with, and they never slow their target. You need to slow your target. It's free CC, but more importantly for the warrior relies on getting off auto attacks in terms of generating rage effectively. And if your target is not slowed, they're just going to walk away from you, get to your healer, where they're trying to go, peel off. You need to keep your target slowed to min-max your damage. So never let Hamstring fall off, okay? And it only lasts 10 seconds in PvP, not 15, so you really have to monitor that. Now, in terms of your actual damage rotation, the most important ability outside of Hamstring, which is arguably in your damage rotation, is going to be Mortal Strike. Mortal Strike applies deep wounds, which buffs your damage from your mastery, and it also applies mortal wounds, and it's 25% healing reduction in PvP, not 50. It's only 50 when you apply Sharpened Blade. Okay? Very, very important to keep that up at all times. So Hamstring first, then MS, and once you've done that, depending on your rage situation, you can begin dumping damage into Condemn or Executes. Mortal Strike again, make sure that buff stays up. Hamstring again, and then in my free globals, I look to Execute because it's the most damage just straight out, and then Overpower for any free globals. If I'm rage capped, I want to make sure that I'm dumping some of my rage before going into using my overpowers, as those don't cost any rage, and I don't want to be rage capped. That's a thing that you learn through PvE DPS. So it's going to be Hamstring, MS. If I'm rage capped, I want to make sure I'm dumping a bit of rage, and then into some overpowers, Sharpen, Mortal Strike. That's essentially the rotation. So Hamstring, MS, Execute if possible, and then you can use your fillers for overpower. As far as any other extra rage that you do have, the last thing that you want to do is be spending your rage on slam. I'd rather never press slam. I only have it there if I'm just so full on rage, I have so much uptime and I have nothing else to press, right? I'd rather dump my rage into things like ignore pain or just save my rage till my next mortal strike, right? So if I have the target slowed, I've kept up hamstring, and let's say all of my abilities are essentially on CD, right? I've applied mortal strike and I've overpowered, and then I've applied mortal strike again. Rather than dumping my rage into some slams at the end of my rotation, I'd rather just make sure I have ignore pain up and then wait for mortal strike to come back off cooldown. I don't want to be sitting here spamming slams as MS is about to come back up and then not have enough rage to mortal strike. That's not what you want to have happen, okay? The way you keep up effective damage is just maintaining your mortal strike. It's rather simple. Condemning or executing if possible, overpowering as filler, making sure you have ignore pain rolling if you have extra rage, and then just keep doing that rotation over and over and over again, and you'll keep applying pressure that way. Now, on to your defensive abilities that are, I would argue, probably the most important abilities on the Arms Warrior in Shadowlands 9.1. Again, we kind of touched on ignore pain as your filler offensive spell to spend rage, but it's also very important to keep up defensively to make sure that you're mitigating a lot of the damage that you're taking. A lot of people also ask me questions on defensive stance, like when do I use defensive stance? Do you burst a defensive stance? Do you burst in only battle and then defense the rest of the game? The way you want to use your stance is when you have good uptime and you're not being focused, you want to dictate the pace of the fight with your stances. So if the enemy's training my healer and I'm not taking any damage, I don't want to be sitting in defensive stance trying to peel for him, right? I want to be min-maxing my damage and staying in battle, because you lose 20% damage when you're in defensive stance. I know here it says that you deal 10% less damage and take 20% less. No, in PvP, you deal 20% less damage and you also take 20% less damage. So it's 20% less damage overall. You're not going to create a lot of pressure. You want to spend as little amount of time in defensive stance as possible. However, if you have no trinket and your team is in trouble and you have no cooldowns left on your team, you don't want to get caught in battle stance. So what I like to do is, if I get to my target and I have the opportunity to apply a lot of pressure and I'm not being focused and I have my trinket, I always come out and I burst in battle stance. But if I'm slowly trying to get to my target, or I'm getting kited like a BM hunter I'm trying to connect to the BM hunter or the survival hunter and they're kiting me and dealing damage at range, there's no reason for me to be taking extra damage as I'm approaching a target. So as I'm crossing the map or trying to get somewhere and I haven't connected yet, I'm always in D. Once I get to my target and I'm ready to deal some damage and I know I'm in a good spot where I'm safe, I make sure I'm applying pressure in battle. If I want the target to hit me and they're training my healer, I'm never in defensive stance, right? I'm always in battle stance, trying to dictate that, because what they're going to do is realize that this warrior is crushing me. I need to focus him a little bit more. He's in battle stance. I need to force him into defensive stance, and that is ultimately very, very important. Now on to your parry, die by the sword. This cooldown with the conduit here is extremely strong. Stalwart Guardian. It's a 1 minute and 30 second CD. You want to use this ideally to pair it up with an enemy offensive cooldown. So if I'm fighting an assassination rogue, if I'm fighting a BM hunter, if I'm fighting a fire mage and my healer's in CC and I know they've popped combustion or vendetta or they popped bestial wrath, they've used one of their major offensive CDs, that's when I want to use die by the sword. I want to use this cooldown to counter one of their offensive cooldowns. Sometimes there's going to be a situation where your healer is not in CC and you're taking a lot of damage and you're just going to go down if you don't press it. Obviously, press the cooldown if you can't kite away and you're kind of stuck there. But ideally, you want to pair this with other offensive CDs. And one of the benefits of having this as a 1.5 minute CD is it essentially will line up with any major offensive CD the enemy team has. Another way that you'll use it is when paired with Intervene. Okay, Intervene, how do we use this? Intervene is arguably one of the most broken abilities in World of Warcraft still. A lot of people have been asking for it to get nerfed, and it still hasn't got nerfed. That's great if you're a warrior. So essentially the way you will use this cooldown, this intervene cooldown, there's two scenarios when you use this. The first scenario, and it's probably the most likely scenario, is you save your intervene for when your healer is not able to heal. So if your healer gets put into a sheep, a trap, some type of CC, and they're going your partner, your other DPS ally, you will only intervene to basically stop that go. So if my healer gets put in a sheep and I know they're going to be going my mage over here, I'm going to intervene to him, and I make sure that I stay in range, because it reads that they have to remain within 10 yards of you. So you can't just intervene him and then run away, like intervene and then leap across the map. It'll break the intervene despite the buff showing up. They will still take damage. You need to remain close to your target. So when your healer gets put into CC, that should instantly trigger something in your brain that, oh, I need to intervene my ally. Another way, in the other scenario that you use intervene, is when you know that, for example, you're fighting a rep paladin, and the rep paladin is popping their wings and they're about to crush your teammate. Your healer, like, he can't heal because he's getting swarmed by a bunch of people. You will then try to mitigate all of their damage with your die by the sword. So if the ret's going at my mage here and he's popped his wings and he's about to one-shot him, I make sure that I'm in defensive stance, and then I pop my die by the sword and intervene, right? So I'll intervene to him and die by the sword, and I make sure I'm in D. I take 30% less damage from die by the sword. I also parry melee attacks, and then I'm also in defensive stance, and I take an additional 20% less damage. That's 50% damage reduction on me, and I'm parrying any melee attacks also on my ally. That's how you mitigate damage. So you use intervene paired up with your die by the sword to mitigate damage, and you use intervene to essentially help out your healer when they're put into CC or when they're getting trained and they can't heal, right? Whenever they can't heal, that's when you want to use your intervene. You're using it to assist your healer to make it so they don't have to trinket anything unnecessary. And you always want to use it when you're in defensive stance, and maybe you can press ignore pain as well to really mitigate that damage. You're looking to use this cooldown to help out your team. You rarely ever use this cooldown for mobility unless you're fighting a class that doesn't have any melee attacks. Like, let's say you're fighting Holy Priest Balanced Druid, for example. You can then use your intervene to get across the map. But ideally, you're using your intervene to mitigate damage, and you want to min-max it by using your die by the sword, D-stance, and ignore pain to really help out your healer. Don't intervene randomly. Use it when it matters. When their teammate has popped major cooldowns and you can negate all of that with die by the sword, or if your healer's been put into a trap, a sheep, or a cyclone, and your teammate might go down there, you want to do that every time they get put into CC to really help out your team. Now, you have other great defensive talents that are baseline, like Rallying Cry. Same thing as Intervene. You want to use this to help out your teammates or yourself, especially when your healer's not able to heal you. The rule of all of your defensive cooldowns on any class is always to use them when you can't get help from your healer. So if he's getting trained and he needs assistance and you've intervened him and he's still dying, or you're stuck in the middle of the map and he can't heal you, that's when you want to use your rally or your intervene or any other cooldown. You also have spell reflection that you can use for your teammate if you're playing the mass spell reflect legendary, or just baseline spell reflect for yourself. Don't randomly press this. Use this to reflect a big chaos bolt, a cyclone. Use it as a way to mitigate CC on yourself or mitigate damage. Don't just press it because you think that it's a good time to press it. Look for an ability that you think's going on you and try to spell reflect that. Now, a lot of people ask about Bladestorm, and is Bladestorm something that you should use offensively? Although it does pretty good damage and it can apply your deep wounds, most of the time, especially if I'm playing Kyrian or Necrolord, I don't use Bladestorm offensively anymore. I only use it defensively or as a way to immune CC or get out of CC. So if I'm getting rooted by a druid, or I see a cyclone being cast on me or a sheep being cast on me and I want to connect to my target, I will then Bladestorm so I'm immune to CC and I'm immune to slows. And if I time it well at the very end of their cast, they will essentially sheep me while I'm Bladestorming and it'll put me on diminishing return. And that's also very, very effective. So I use Bladestorm sometimes if I really want to add a bit of pressure, but mostly so I can get around the map safely without getting stuck. It's kind of a big cooldown, just a ways to add a bit of pressure that you can get value out of your sweeping strikes. So let's talk about our burst. When you're bursting, you want to Avatar, but Avatar isn't as much damage actually as your Warbreaker. If you read Avatar, it's 20% increased damage. Warbreaker is now 30% increased damage. Warbreaker is a shorter cooldown, but the reason why Avatar is a longer cooldown is it also removes you out of snares and root effects. So I like to use my Avatar sometimes to break out of roots, whether it's Hunter roots or Resto Druid or Feral Druid roots or slows. I love Frost Novas. You don't always have to pair these together, but you can if you want to get the most out of your damage. So Avatar, Warbreaker, and it's the same rotation that we talked about. Make sure you have Hamstring up, and then you want to apply Mortal Strike, execute if possible, overpower as filler, keep up Ignore Pain. You get the picture. Sharpen during your burst is also very important. Sharpening during your teammate's burst is also very important. However, you don't just throw this out for max damage, you also throw this out to mitigate healing. So if I know that the enemy healer has been put in a long CC chain and we're crushing one of their teammates, as the healer comes out, I'm going to look to sharpen the target that I'm attacking because that's going to extend our CC chain a bit and really apply some type of healing reduction to make it harder for them to recover. Sweeping Strikes is another very, very important ability that you want to take advantage of during your burst if possible, if enemies are stacked, because you essentially get double value and you can really cleave the enemy team, right? But it's going to require you to make sure that you're looking for those good opportunities. It's great for Kyrian as you spear them. You can really cleave, you get a double spear. But once again, like all of your abilities, try to get out of the habit of just using them randomly. Don't parry randomly. Don't intervene randomly. Don't reflect randomly. Don't fear randomly, right? Use your cooldowns for what they're meant to be used for. When you look at your setup potential, right? You have your Stormbolt and you have your fear. These are things that you use to set up, right? So if your team is struggling to get some type of setup, right? You need setup to win games and they can't get any CC on the healer. I might look to fear the healer and then charge back over with a Stormbolt on our target that we're trying to take down here. Also, let's say I want to go on the healer and we're all surrounded and we're trying to focus the enemy healer and they're all stacked up on us. I might look for an AoE fear into a Stormbolt on the healer to try to finish him off there. All of your abilities have purpose and it's very, very important to use them like that. You don't want to press anything randomly as a warrior because the way that you excel on the Arms Warrior is getting the most out of your abilities. And one of the best strengths of the Arms Warrior is you have an insane toolkit. So the skill cap to the class isn't just, oh, condemn, like YouTube comments always say, although that's what you see a lot of warriors do. The way you actually climb on the warrior is min-maxing all of your abilities and getting the most value out of them. So hopefully that explains the class a bit better and answers some of the questions that I hear a lot. As far as comp options go, you have so many comp options. The best healer to play with in twos is going to be the Resto Druid. You can also play with a Resto Shaman or a Holy Paladin. The weakest healer is arguably going to be the Disc or Holy Priest. There aren't any real viable options for double DPS Arms Warrior for twos, so don't really consider that unless you just want to play with some friends and have some fun. For threes, you have so many good comps. You have any melee cleave that you want to play. You can play Ret Warrior, Resto Shaman, or any healer like a Resto Druid or a Holy Paladin. You can play Feral Warrior and a healer. You can play Enhancement Shaman, Arms Warrior, and a healer. You can play with a DK, a Death Knight. TSG is also an amazing option. And then you can also play various hybrid comps as well. Hybrid comps meaning that you can play with a Shadow Priest, Arms Warrior, Shadow Priest, Resto Druid. You can play Arms Warrior, Shadow Priest, Resto Shaman. Any healer honestly works. Just take what you can get and start queuing some games. You'll know as you get better what healer works the best. You can play with a Fire Mage. You can play with an Ellie Shaman. You can play even with the Balance Druid. You can play with a Hunter. It's not the best comp, but you can make that work. But arguably, I'd say your best comps are going to be like Ret Warrior healer, Arms Warrior, Enhancement Shaman, Arms Warrior, DK healer, like all of those melee cleaves, and then Mage Warrior healer, Shadow Priest Warrior healer are going to be probably the ones that you see the most that perform overall the best. Anyways, you guys, I hope that guide was helpful and informative. If you have any questions, please check out my live stream somewhere here on the screen. If I'm not live, you can also check out my boy Magnus. He'll help you out. And if you don't check out streams, if that's not your thing, you can leave some comments in the comment section below, and I'll try to get back to you as soon as I can. Thank you guys so much for watching the video, and I'll see you all in the next one.